I flew to Manila at the time to investigate what was going on, but we had no clear notion yet of what was actually planned. And when the intelligence emerged about the plot, and the intelligence emerged actually accidentally, just as a result of a fire in the apartment where explosives were being concocted. And it was a bomb factory. And in addition to finding the equipment that was necessary to fabricate explosives, they saw all this Catholic stuff, vestments, things.
They were planning to assassinate Pope John Paul II using improvised explosive device.
January 6, 1995, 2 years after the first World Trade Center attack. The Philippines, a largely Catholic country, is preparing for a visit from Pope John Paul II.
Ramzi Yousef returns to Manila's Josefa apartments to finalize the Bojinka Plot.
After he proved that his liquid nitroglycerin bombs would work, he realized he had to just make them slightly more powerful to be able to bring down airliners. The bombs would be detonated and the planes would have fallen out of the sky into the Pacific. Yousef hired an apartment in Manila and began mixing chemicals. He began preparing these bombs.
Yousef and his associates begin building 12 bombs to simultaneously bring down 12 747s, the most deadly terrorist act in history.
The apartment in the Philippines was a bomb factory. It was a very complicated plot. 12 different operatives to get on 12 different planes at specific times, get off at specific times, and to set the timers on the explosive devices to function at specific times.
As Yousef cooks up explosives by the sink, the concoction accidentally ignites. The acrid smoke drives the two men from their apartment.
Thick smoke begins to pour from room 603.
There was a security guard at the apartments who forced his way in. He could see a load of chemicals and the fire brigade were alerted. When the investigators turned up, they were looking at the contents of this room and finding an array of terrorist equipment.
The explosive ingredients, the chemicals, the timer for cooking, the books, dictionaries, formulas.
Ramzi Yousef was just down the block watching what was going on with his conspirator, Hakim Murad. He sent Murad back in. He ordered him basically, you've got to go back in there and get the laptop and try and get as much out of there as you can. Murad nearly got away with it, but he was captured by the Filipino police.
Police arrest Murad as he tries to flee. They also seize the laptop. Yousef is watching from across the street. Within hours, he buys a first-class ticket to Singapore and slips out of the country.
Murad is interrogated with extreme brutality by the Filipino president's own security team. But even beatings and waterboarding failed to bring a confession.
Very tough guy. Murad was a tough guy.
We are facing a blank wall. Almost zero information about these people. The visit of the Pope was underway, and we need to find out whether there are threats.
So they said, let us turn Murad to the Philippine National Police. To a young colonel at the time, known for his great expertise in interrogating communist rebels by the name Boogie Mendoza.
Abdul Hakim Murad, a commercial airline pilot, he's interrogated by Colonel Mendoza, a veteran fighter against Islamist rebels who threatens to deliver him to the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad.
You are telling 50% truth, 50% liar. Maybe if this lie will exceed 50%, I will not waste my time again here and deliver to you, to the Israeli again. I'm becoming impatient. You are creating stories that are unbelievable. But I'm starting to believe on him. Why? Because I have seen his eyes. He's not winking. He can see me eye to eye. And that's what I'm after. I have seen this eyes long time ago, several times. So this guy is telling me the truth.
Indeed, the plot is foiled at the last moment when a fire breaks out in the apartment where Ramzi makes his bombs, on which the police discover the details of an operation codenamed Bojinka. Analyzing the computer's contents, investigators then discover new elements. It's the follow-up to the Bojinka plan, whose concept is radically new.
Delta and Northwest jumbo jets bound for Portland, Honolulu, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York. The first clear straight line between the Philippines plot and September 11th. The next phase of Bojinka. Terrorists trained to fly commercial planes in the United States.
I asked him, what is Bojinka? It's a code name. He told me, what code name for? Then he trembled. Bojinka, they told me, is an explosion. He used the word nose diving. I remembered it. Diving the plane into several targets. He mentioned the Pentagon, he mentioned a nuclear facility, he mentioned Langley. So I was shocked.
That's the biggest surprise. When the third component of the Ublan Bojinka is the seizing commercial aircraft in the continental U.S., controlling it, and diving crash specifically to Langley, Virginia, okay, and other targets. How did you know this? Because Ramzi Yousef is telling me. So you are admitting that you are one of the pilots. Mr. Murad, I remember that you told me that you studied pilot here. Who are your companions? There is a pilot training in the U.S. So I was again mesmerized. He is emphasizing, Mr. Murad is emphasizing that it is a suicide attack using an aircraft.
Do you think that some of the pilots of 9/11 were already in 95 ready to operate?
Yeah, based on my analysis, some of them might be there already. I have reasons to believe that it was the blueprint of 9/11.
Colonel Mendoza insists that he shared all this information with the FBI. The FBI acknowledges receiving intelligence from Mendoza, but claims there were no details about the plot that became 9/11.
They had up to 10 Islamic terrorists training in U.S. flight schools. That plot was well in motion, and Ramzi Yousef had it all on his Toshiba laptop. They had up to 7 targets, including the Trade Center, the Pentagon, a nuclear facility, CIA headquarters, the Sears and Transamerica Towers, and the White House.
February 1995, Islamabad, Pakistan.
After this huge plot to kill thousands of people had been discovered in the Philippines, Yousef is again on the run. He's been on the run for nearly 2 years now, and he flees back to Pakistan. He renews his acquaintance with Ishtiaq Parker.
Yousef takes Parker back to Bangkok. The terrorist will use his young recruit as an instrument for swift revenge.
Ramzi Yousef tells him to go and buy some hard-bodied suitcases, some hard-shell suitcases. He goes and does this. He also buys some clothes that can be used to put in the suitcase around the bomb, just as cover for the device.
And the source was carrying all the explosives. Ramzi was clean. Of course, wanted to make sure that there was nothing on him that would incriminate him in case he was stopped.
Parker starts to have doubts about this. He's very scared of Ramzi Yousef. He's not as militant as Ramzi Yousef by any means, and he's not convinced that killing several hundred people is a very good idea.
Parker makes an excuse and convinces Yousef to abort the plan.
Parker is now very scared of Ramzi Yousef. He's very worried about what he's going to be expected to do next.
The terrorist sends his young recruit back to Pakistan with new marching orders.
Parker's having none of this. He spots a US magazine on sale on a newsstand, which indicates there's a multi-million-dollar reward out for Ramzi Yousef's capture.
By now, the FBI's $2 million reward for information on Yousef finally yields a tip.
February 3rd, we received a telephone call from a
female embassy employee that somebody was in her front yard acting a little strange, very nervous, very scared, and had a U.S. magazine, Newsweek or Time magazine, rolled up in his hand.
I then responded to the house to see what was going on, in essence. And at first, we chalked it up to someone just who wanted some money.
For his own safety, the DSS agents spirit Parker inside the U.S. Embassy for further questioning.
He began to speak of a laptop computer. He gave us physical characteristics that only someone in close and recent contact with him would be aware of.
The FBI decides to scramble an assault team to Pakistan. Parker informs the agents that Yousef is again on the move.
Yousef announced that he was going to get on a bus and leave the city, so then Parker slipped away and managed to pass this information to the US Embassy. The embassy realized things were moving too quickly. They had to capture Yousef immediately.
The DSS agents must work with the terrified informant without the aid of the FBI task force. Yousef is to board a bus for Peshawar. The DSS realize he must be prevented from reaching the tribal region.
He would have been gone because he would have fled. He would have gone into Peshawar, from Peshawar over the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan.
While American and Pakistani agents stake out the bus terminal, the informant again makes contact.
We received a telephone call from the informant saying that Yousef had changed his plans.
He's not going to the bus station now. We're going up later. He's at the Sukasa Hotel. He's going to take a nap in a few minutes. Again, we moved over towards the Sukasa.
The embassy immediately requests the aid of Pakistani law enforcement.
The ambassador asked for their immediate assistance in response to the Sukasa guest house and explained to them that we had very good reason to believe that Ramzi Yousef was in country, that we thought we would be able to take him very soon.
There was a very real possibility that we might be able to finally capture this guy, Ramzi Yousef, in Pakistan, but we had to do it very, very carefully. I had prearranged with the informant to go across the street, go into the guest house.
Ishtiaq Parker went up to his room. He established that Yousef was certainly still there and appeared to be building yet more bombs, stuffing explosives into remote-controlled children's cars.
If indeed Yousef was in his room, once they finished, he was supposed to come out. He was to take a ball cap that he had off of his head and rub his right hand through his hair.
Parker came out of the building. He ran his hand through his hair to indicate that Yousef was there, and the American and Pakistani agents began their raid.
I went to the front door, and the Pakistani authorities went in first.
Where is room 16? They shouted. They began swarming up the stairs, American agents with their hands on their guns, Pakistani agents already with their guns in their hands leading the way. They gathered outside room 16.
ISI broke through the door. Ramzi was on his bed, asleep, probably had been asleep for only a few minutes. They jerked him out of bed, threw him up against the window.
Spread his legs and then checked his identity.
The ISI agents kept control of him. He was very compliant.
One of the Pakistani agents said, "Is this the guy you're after?"
Didn't open his eyes, didn't utter a sound. Finally, I gestured to the ISI agent to turn his face to me.
I pulled out a picture I had in my jacket, and I held it up next to his head, and he looked at me, I looked at him, and I looked at the brigadier, and I said, "That's him."
And I said, "What's up, Ramzi?" It was the first time he'd heard English spoken that morning, and he realized that the Americans were there.
The feared Pakistani ISI take immediate custody of Yousef.
The ISI agent went back around and pinched Ramzi on the neck and said, "The Americans will go home tonight, but I will stay with you." And I think Ramzi then had a little moment of truth. His eyes filled with tears. His knees basically went out from under him.
We come in behind them. They had taken a sheet and thrown it over him, so he looked like Casper the Ghost. They said, "We've got him."
When Ramzi Yousef is caught, it's a key piece of the web because he's the mastermind of the World Trade Center bombing and so many other plots. But as the agents were moving in on that guest house, a guy across the street who saw what was going on took off. And that was his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And Ramzi Yousef's uncle had all the remnants of all of the plots that Ramzi Yousef had in progress. And he took these and he found his way to Al-Qaeda.
Yousef is taken to a safe house where FBI agent Garrett confronts him.
I go in and they have him in a room. There's a guard on each side of him. His arms are restrained. So we have a little bit of small talk. He talks a little bit about explosives because he had part of a finger missing. He said those were bad attempts at building bombs. I said to myself at this point, I just might as well just drive right through the front door. And I said, well, did you blow up the World Trade Center? And he pauses and he says, no, I masterminded blowing up the World Trade Center. I said, okay, can we talk about that? He was just very proud about what he had done and knew that it needed to be done because of our involvement in Muslim countries, and in particular, our relationship with Israel. He wanted to, quote unquote, force us to change our policies. But he started complaining early on that he was really upset with the people that were driving this attack, that were pushing him to get it done, said they didn't give me enough money, they didn't give me enough time. It's kind of like somebody who works in a plant who's complaining about the machines they have and they don't make enough money building this car. He was arrogant, self-assured. He says, you have to guarantee me one thing. And I said, what is that? That I look presentable in professional clothes in front of the media. He wanted to make a positive, I guess, impression or appearance that he was a guy who had it together.
To convince the Pakistanis to allow Yousef's extradition to the U.S., the DSS agents must revert back to their mission of diplomacy.
We were able to put the pressure on the Pakistani government that was appropriate without embarrassing them, but at the same time, making sure that they gave us Ramzi Yousef.
Benazir Bhutto, the Pakistani leader, agreed that Ramzi Yousef could be flown out of Pakistan and returned to America to stand trial, which was difficult for her to do because there were militants in her own government who weren't happy about cooperating with America.
Ramzi Yousef is loaded onto a military plane headed for New York's Stewart Air Force Base.
I took the Port Authority chopper from New York up to Stewart, along with several individuals from the New York office, and we waited for the flight to arrive.
In order to ensure American jurisdiction, Yousef must be flown directly to American soil.
With their cooperation, we were able to send a team of agents to Pakistan covertly to bring him back to stand trial here in the United States.
During the long flight home, the FBI agents get inside Yousef's head.
We covered the whole gamut of his terrorist activities, the Manila Air Plot, the Bojinka Plot, and the World Trade Center plot, questions about other plots in the Philippines. He was proud of what he did and was really anxious to tell us how he did it.
Finally, the terrorist transport plane touches down in the U.S. The final leg will take Yousef through Lower Manhattan.
It was a very clear night. I'll never forget it. It was just crystal clear.
We wanted to make sure that he was flown back past the World Trade Center at night with the lights bright, flashing boldly in the early morning hours.
We came right down the Hudson River, and of course, at the base of Manhattan, where the Twin Towers all lit up.
He was in the custody of the lead FBI agent in the World Trade Center investigation, Bill Gavin.
New York just looked beautiful that night. Crystal clear, crisp, lights twinkling, and of course we had him with the hood on. And as we come down the river, we took the hood off and got to about 34th Street, where the Empire State Building was out on one side. I said to him, look straight ahead, see that, Ramzi? The trade centers are still standing there, aren't they? In his little accent, he said, they wouldn't be if I had enough money and enough explosives. Right up to that moment, the bravado was incredible.
In a convoy of federal and local patrol cars, Ramzi Ahmed Yousef was brought into New York City late Wednesday night, ending a worldwide manhunt. He was arrested Tuesday in Pakistan by Pakistani authorities and brought back by the FBI on a U.S. plane, then into custody with heavy security on the street in case of any terrorist attacks prompted by his arrest.
At his trial a year later in New York's Southern District Court,
Yousef decides to handle his own defense against the advice of the judge. He performs better than expected, but he's found guilty on all charges related to the bombing of PAL 434 and conspiring to bomb 12 American passenger planes. Yousef is also found guilty in a second trial for the World Trade Center bombing. In his final summing up, Yousef justifies his actions.
Yes, I am a terrorist and proud of it. And I only support terrorism so long as it's against the United States government and against Israel, because you are more than terrorists.
Although Pakistani, Yousef describes himself as Palestinian by choice. And he justifies the PAL 434 and World Trade Center bombings as punishment for a U.S. foreign policy that favors Israel over Palestine.
And hypocrites!
Ramzi Yousef is sentenced to 240 years to life in the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. He will serve his sentence in virtual solitary confinement.
He gave only one interview to the Arabic newspaper Al Hayat. He told correspondent Ragita Duran about a new Islamic militant group that would rise up to challenge the United States.
He was speaking about a network. An international network, a network all over different countries, different nationalities. Eventually I said, my goodness, he was talking about Al-Qaeda. He was telling us a lot about Al-Qaeda.
Ramzi Yousef might have given some key clues about Al-Qaeda and its intentions, but few in the U.S. government were listening.
Ramzi Yousef, while born in Kuwait, was born of Pakistani and Palestinian parents. So the Palestinian cause would have been something inculcated in him from early childhood on, and the enmity towards the West, but Israel in particular, was something deeply seared within him. Here was a man with very powerful educational credentials to play a very active role in designing airborne explosives and in technically planning operations. One of the interesting aspects about Ramzi Yousef is his family connection. He is the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the architect of the 9/11 attack. So we have a family tradition of radicalism here.
Actually, Gerald M. Post is forgetting that it's two nephews. One of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephews, and cousin to Ramzi, Amar al-Baluchi, aka Ali Abdul Aziz, was arrested in Pakistan in 2003, also linked to being a bin Laden bagman who funneled over $100,000 to ringleader Mohammed Atta. According to Wikipedia and mainstream sources, it's not known whether KSM was born on March 1st, 1964, or April 14th, 1965, or whether he was born in Baluchistan, Pakistan, or even Kuwait City, Kuwait, as BBC News has reported. He's fluent in Arabic, English, Urdu, and Baluchi, and is also believed to belong to the Baluch ethnic group. Baluch are mainly northwestern Iranians. Ramzi Yousef has described himself as an Iraqi, as a Kuwaiti national, and as a Baluchi from Pakistan. What could all this mean? According to Israeli journalist Yossi Melman, who wrote in 1998 in Haaretz, and later in a book called Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars, that since the 1950s, Shin Bet, Israel's FBI, is known to have put agents in Arab sectors mixing in with Arabs and creating families. Their bosses called them Mista Aravim, which in Hebrew basically means Arab masquerader or masquerading as Arabs. They are commonly known as Arab platoons. Now some of you may ask, how could Israeli Jews mix into Arab areas without other Arabs or Muslims noticing? As most Americans are unaware, other than white European Jews in Israel, Israel's population also consists of Arab Jews, who are dark-skinned and without fail are treated as a minority. Unlike European and Ashkenazi Jews who harbor Israel, Arab Jews are either generations from Palestine or other neighboring Middle Eastern and African countries prior to the 1948 formation of Israel. And because it's compulsory for Israeli citizens to serve in the military, Arab Jews do work within Israeli intelligence. This is the advantage of how Israel has perfected toppling infiltrating neighboring Muslim and Arab nations. Don't think so? How do you think Israel has been able to topple over Egypt so many times? Check out the Lavon Affair, aka Operation Susanna, on Wikipedia. A formerly secret CIA assessment, Israel's Foreign Intelligence and Security Services, from March 1979 reported that it had been a long-standing policy for Israeli intelligence to disguise Jews as Arabs. One of the established goals of intelligence and security services is that each officer be fluent in Arabic. A 9-month intensive Arabic language course is given annually to students. The Assignment, a 1997 Hollywood-made movie on the CIA Mossad hunt for infamous most wanted terrorist Carlos the Jackal starring Ben Kingsley and Aidan Quinn, demonstrates a prime example of how Mr. Arvim are able to function.
Listen to me, you piece of shit! I'm trying very hard to be professional about this, but you are in Israeli hands now, so don't play games with me. Entiende, hombre?
Israeli hands? You're telling me you're Israelis? Not Arabs?
Other than the false identities of 9/11 hijackers, as well as other wanted radical Islamic terrorists or events that have been blamed by such, this revelation in mind may lead one to speculate that this Israeli advantage makes it impossible to detect who is really an authentic Muslim. One could say almost like a multi-Semitic advantage. I mean, why else would a Palestinian like El Sayyid Nosair, who clearly looks like an Arab or Muslim, have been able to attend an exclusive Jewish event and mix into the audience to assassinate Meir Kahane? World-renowned novelist and historian best known for espionage and military expertise as well as storylines, Tom Clancy wrote in his book Ops Center Acts of War that Mr. Aravim, Arab masqueraders, do not allow their real identities to become known to people outside their unit, and that even when they are undercover, they go to great lengths to avoid being recorded. A made-for-TV miniseries based on Clancy's book depicts such possible examples,
including the name of Stolypin's paymaster, Abdul Fazawid. You recognize the name?
Yeah, renegade arms trader, recruited by Mossad in 83.
He's your man? We train many Arabs.
10 times more Israeli Arabs are joining Israel's army than 3 years ago. Some who swear the oath of allegiance are suffering the consequences.
طبعا تعرضت لكثير انتقادات قالوا لي انه انا خاينه انه انا عميله صهيونيه.
So why are their fellow Arabs joining the Israeli Defense Force? Some say it's for personal financial gain.
Spies Against Armageddon is the new book that takes a closer look inside the matter. Dan Raviv co-wrote the book. There have been recent news stories that we've talked about, those assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists. Can you say with all certainty that this group is behind those assassinations?
I do feel certain. I have co-authored this book with Yossi Melman, who's one of the leading Israeli journalists. We did a book even 22 years ago, Terrell, called Every Spy a Prince. And so we've kept our contacts, and we think we understand what Israeli intelligence does and why it does it. So one move that's right out of the Mossad's playbook is to infiltrate some of its own operatives, Israelis, into Iran. They have ways of getting in, and we say that they assassinated at least 4 Iranian nuclear scientists.
And that's the question there. You wonder, how can an Israeli assassin get into the borders of Iran? How do these missions happen?
Well, no one's telling us exactly how they've been doing it in Iran, because that's very current. But we did get the history of how the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, has done it in other enemy countries, in Egypt, in Syria, in Lebanon. And so there's a special unit of the Mossad, almost like a Mossad within the Mossad.
Indeed, a Mossad within the Mossad, or a Mossad within what they've deemed as Al-Qaeda, because it turns out that these Mossad assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists around this time and a couple of years later was all in collusion with the Iranian MEK, an organization still considered a terrorist group and cult, which nearly 20 years earlier colluded with Ramzi Yousef in the Imam Riza shrine bombing in Mashhad, Iran. So what does any of this have to do with KSM and the first family of terrorism? A lot, considering what's confirmed 8.5 years later with Israel's role in 9/11, while the narrative mastermind is KSM. Because yet again, there's another Israeli link to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, but through Ramzi Yousef with his original companion and possible commandant, Ahmed Ajaj, who had both landed at JFK Airport on September 2nd, 1992. As you'll recall, Yousef was still let into the country using an Iraqi passport, while Ajaj was detained by airport security for trying to enter on a photo-substituted Swedish passport, while claiming to be a member of the Swedish press, carrying bomb-making manuals, videos and other materials on weapons explosives assembly, anti-American and anti-Israeli materials, instructions on document forgery, and 2 devices made to alter passports issued from Saudi Arabia. One of the manuals was entitled Al-Qaeda, the Base, written in 1982, years before the supposed group was founded. However, prior to all this, Ajaj was arrested in 1988 as a petty crook counterfeiting US dollars out of a base in East Jerusalem. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in federal prison but only served 1 year. Robert L. Friedman of the Village Voice, who had sources within Israeli intelligence, reported that while Ajaj was in prison, he was recruited by the Mossad. When he had gotten out, he had seemingly undergone a radical transformation. Suddenly he became a devout Muslim and an outspoken hardline nationalist, yet prior, Ajaj was never known to have been involved in Intifada activities or being pro-Hamas or PLO. Friedman also stated, Yousef associate Ajaj appeared to have been recruited as a Mossad asset and deployed as an infiltrator into Islamic fundamentalist circles. Then, Ajaj was arrested for smuggling weapons into the West Bank, supposedly for El Fatah, a subdivision of the PLO. Friedman's sources in Israeli intelligence say that the arrest and Ajaj's subsequent deportation were staged by the Mossad to establish his credentials as an Intifada activist. Mossad allegedly tasked Ajaj to infiltrate radical Palestinian groups operating outside Israel and to report back to Tel Aviv. Israeli intelligence sources said that it is not unusual for Mossad to recruit from the ranks of common criminals. After Ajaj's deportation from Israel, he showed up in Pakistan where he turned up in the company of anti-Soviet Mujahideen rebels in Afghanistan. This in itself could point further toward Ajaj working for the Mossad, for according to the Covert Action Information Bulletin September 1987, the funding and supply lines for the Mujahideen was not only the second largest covert operation in the CIA's history, but it was also, according to former Mossad operative Viktor Ostrowski writing in The Other Side of Deception, under the direct supervision of the Mossad.
Couldn't believe the FBI would basically tell him to build the bomb, give him real detonators, and then tell him let it go forward.
So is Alex Jones right? Was the 1993 World Trade Center bombing an inside job? A government false flag perpetrated by the FBI?
We met Emad through another agent that had worked with him before. She said that he was a very good guy, trustworthy, former Egyptian army officer who immigrated to the United States. Now he was the head of security at a hotel.
You cannot imagine how happy I was to, as just a new American citizen, that the FBI wanted my help.
We were trying to penetrate this cell that we knew was dangerous. And we were trying to develop Emad as an asset to provide us with real-time intelligence that we could use to prevent an act of terrorism.
Agents plant Emad outside the courthouse among Nosair's supporters. And Nosair's uncle, Ibrahim El-Gabroni, takes the bait.
I think within the first day or two being there, Emad was approached by Gabroni and asked him, we've never seen you before, who are you, why are you here?
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
He responded that he was here to make amends with God for wasting his life serving a illegitimate government of Egypt.
They recruit an informer who is more than informer. He's more like an operative.
And how did you get these followers in front of the courthouse to believe that you were like them, one of them, and get on the inside?
I established my entry point that I am an ex-Green Berets, and I'm a jeweler, and part-time I do electronic surveillance.
Why a jeweler?
Jewelers means I have money, and I know that they are after money.
Why Green Beret?
Green Berets, I know that either they want me to shoot somebody or they want me to build bomb. Third thing is I'm doing electronic surveillance because I might have recordings, and if they see some recording devices with me, I don't want it to raise a red flag.
To not put yourself in a position where you would be considered conspiring, that you had to walk a very fine line with not leading them to do things. I know that we talked before about Anticev and Napoli. There were very strict rules that you had to follow.
Well, I was schooled very well by the special agents who were handling me. John Anticev, Louis Napoli, Nance Floyd. They schooled me not to suggest targets, not to suggest bombing, because that's called entrapment. all of that was new to me in the American law. So I start to learn quickly not to open, but to give open-end questions to let them roll and give me the information needed. Yet I don't want to jeopardize the case later on by suggesting them I'm leading them. And I learned that through my case agents.
According to a source close to the case, Emad Salem checked into a Manhattan hospital 3 hours after the blast, complaining of a severe ringing in his ears. A hospital spokesperson refuses to confirm or deny the report.
On August 3, 1993, Paul D'Aronzio interviewed William Kunstler on the Let Them Talk radio program, where Kunstler revealed some details of what he heard on the Salem tapes, as well as some of his own speculations based on his investigation. Here's a transcript part of that interview. Kunstler said, "I've read a lot of the tapes by now, transcriptions of the tapes, which were just furnished to me today. Before I came here, I read some of them, and they are things like having him, Salem, say, 'Well, I think we ought to bomb the George Washington Bridge. That's a very good target. It would make the commuters raise hell with this government of ours.' And then Siddig Ali says, 'Yeah?' Salem, 'And I think so-and-so.' Ali, 'Yeah?' And so on. That's the way it goes, virtually throughout these hundreds of pages of transcriptions. There are 150 hours of tapes. A lot of them are in Arabic, some are in English. But this is the kind of man they're going to put on the witness stand." D'Aronzio responded. Kunstler adds that Salem was the recipient of between $250,000 and $1 million for his services as an informant, plus monies paid to him by other sources linked to foreign governments, including money from an organization founded by the assassinated Rabbi Meir Kahane. Kunstler responded, he, Salem, also received money from Kahane Chai, Rabbi Meir Kahane's group, probably from a lot of other people. The Mossad is not someone to exclude, probably from the Egyptian government. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Egyptian army, which apparently he was.
People speculate that Meir Kahane could wind up dead. You know that.
I know that.
And you have suggested that it would not be at the hands of an Arab, but at the hands of a Jew.
Yes.
Why would they want to murder Meir Kahane now?
Because they are frustrated. They know of no other way to stop him.
Even prior with Nosair's trial, Kunstler maintained an assertion that Kahane was murdered by enemies within his own organization and suffered repercussions while defending him and the 93 bombers.
I asked Dad if he thought Nosair was innocent. He told me that a lawyer never asks his client that question. This was one case he didn't even try to justify.
He sort of morphed into representing the unpopular, almost any unpopular. And it didn't matter so much as to how you became unpopular.
Why is he doing this? I mean, why is he representing those people? You know, aren't there still other cases of people we agree with out there?
He lost a lot of the liberal support that he had. And he was no longer the great civil liberties, civil rights lawyer.
After the verdict, the Jewish Defense Organization staged daily protests in front of our house, shot out our front windows with red paint pellets, and called my father a self-hating Jew.
Kunstler is a traitor! Kunstler is a traitor! Kunstler is a traitor! Kunstler is a...
But it was scary. There were police at either end of the street.
Must go! Kunstler must go!
If there were protesters outside when I got home from school, I would pretend I didn't live there. I didn't want them to know I was his daughter. Dad went on to represent defendants charged with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and others indicted for a plot to blow up the Lincoln and Holland tunnels. No one supported him.
So I hope you people will think of the questions that I don't have. Rabbi Meir Kahane is perhaps the most well-known Jewish leader in the world and certainly the most controversial. His fame started in 1968 when he organized the Jewish Defense League, which became notorious for its militant activities against the Soviet Union, as well as for its self-defense patrols in the inner city, which were meant to protect poor and elderly Jews. Arrested many times for his beliefs and convictions, at one point he served 11 months in a federal prison.
Prior to finding the JDL, in the late 1950s to early 60s, Kahane worked as an FBI informant himself, infiltrating the John Birch Society under the name Michael King. The JDL is a racist and oftentimes violent group of Jewish supremacists that's not a part of mainstream Jewry, but they are known for violent demonstrations and also committing mainly domestic acts of terrorism.
Kahane called the man a dirty Arab. Kahane often refers to Arabs as dogs.
I want to make it clear to those dogs that are standing there, there is no such thing as an Arab village in the state of Israel.
It gives us greater strength. And it's not going to be long before we have the power to clean this place out. And that's where I want them out.
In 1975, Kahane was arrested for leading an attack on police outside the Soviet UN mission and injuring 2 officers. Later that year, Kahane was accused for conspiring to kidnap a Soviet diplomat, bomb the Iraqi embassy in Washington, and ship arms abroad from Israel. His probation for a 1971 firebomb-making incident was revoked, and Kahane was found guilty of violating probation and served a 1-year federal prison sentence. A list of Kahane and JDL crimes are on the FBI website. Its members and leaders, including Kahane's multiple acts of terrorism, are so prominent that even the JDL have them listed on their site.
Many Israeli soldiers make little secret of their support for Kahane, as do some of the settlers.
If I were the settlers, I would rampage through this town and put the fear of God into these Arabs.
On February 25, 1994, exactly a year after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, during the overlapping religious holidays of both Jewish Purim and Muslim Ramadan, one former JDL member, devout follower of Kahane, a New York Jewish doctor who later became an Israeli settler named Baruch Goldstein, walked inside the Ibrahim Mosque at the Cave of the Patriarch's compound in Hebron while carrying an IMI Galil and opened fire on a large number of Palestinian Muslims gathered for prayer inside.
A man wielding an assault rifle fires 110 rounds before a mob stops him, bludgeoning him to death with a fire extinguisher. Dr. Baruch Goldstein, a fanatical right-wing Jew from a nearby Israeli settlement, had killed 29 Palestinians and seriously wounded 70 others.
Let's get our people. What they did to them? What we did to them?
Baruch reportedly swore to take revenge for the killing of Kahane, infamously now known as the Goldstein Massacre.
In an interview with Israeli radio less than 3 months ago, he seemed to warn of today's attack.
With the help of the Almighty, we will found the state of Judah, and then we will know how to deal with them on our own.
Today, after the attack, Israeli militants hailed him as a hero, the son of Meir Kahane calling him a Samson of his time.
Samson of his time? Irrespective to Islamophobic propaganda.
The history of terrorism started in Egypt by creating the Muslim Brotherhood as a political religious organization, and they used violence to convey their message.
As we've visited beginning stages of what some have deemed as the roots of Islamic terrorism, that now subjectively to the American lexicon is equated to suicide bombers, what Kahane's son said about Goldstein is the prime example to show the unexpected fundamental polar opposite with Judaism. Based on the Old Testament character, or what American audiences once remember sexualized with the story of Samson and Delilah, sometimes considered the Israelite version of Hercules, Samson, who's eventually captured by the Philistines, then tortured, and in the end, brings down Dagon's temple, knocking its pillars and killing himself along with all his enemies inside. Nobel Peace Prize winner Seymour Hersh documented in his own book titled The Samson Option, Israel and the Bomb, Israel from its own inception has framed its entire national defense policy around developing nuclear bombs. Hersh claimed that if necessary, Israelis are essentially willing to blow up the world, including themselves, if they have to in order to defeat Arabs and foes they perceive are a danger to Israel's survival. This glorification of founding suicidal combat is later revered going back to the famous mass suicide at Masada by Jewish zealots known as the Siege of Masada, with Roman troops at the end of the First Jewish-Roman War, just like what so-called alt-media sites like WorldNet Daily like to promote.
Masada, the place we left, as Roman soldiers stood on the top amidst the destruction 2,000 years ago, beholding the last Israelite soldiers having taken their own lives rather than give up. Israel was raised from the dead of history, that was her grave, and became a nation again.
Although it's important to recognize Israel being founded in 1948 through modern-day colonialization by European Zionist settlers in a wider range of attacks that in some cases did reach those sacrificial extremes before and after, they are in itself the innovations of modern terrorism by way of such Jewish paramilitary and terrorist groups as the Haganah, Irgun, and Stern Gang, which now the West continues to suffer with its repercussions till this day.
An episode that shocked the world in 1946 in the same way the Munich Olympic tragedy shocked the world last year was the blowing up of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem by Jewish terrorists. One of the leaders of Stern, now a political writer in Israel, was Nathan Yallinmore.
Was not the State of Israel founded in part on the use of terror by Stern Gang, by Irgun?
Of course, I admit.
So you, a former member of the Stern Gang, respect the fighters of Black September?
Of course I respect them. I know that, I wouldn't like to use the same methods as they use, because they do it differently than we did.
The fact is that innocent people die from terror, whoever the terrorist. The Jewish independence fighters, trying to hasten the exit of the British from Palestine and to intimidate the Arab population there, bombed bus stops and office buildings, railroad trains and shopping crowds. The fighters of Stern and Irgun took a toll of innocent victims that ran into the hundred. Leader of the Irgun was Menachem Begin, now a member of the Israeli parliament.
We took all the risks possible in our lives during the fight. We never left this country. The British were here carrying our pictures by every policeman, every soldier. We took all the risks involved in such a fight as everybody else. But I don't want any comparison, even by dissimilarity, between us and the Black September and the Fatah. Completely different stories of a fight, either in the aim or in the method or in the intention. And let us not repeat that sacrilege, Mr. Wallace.
It is sacrilege to you.
It is.
But apparently it's not sacrilege if an Israeli wants to blow themselves up, because the concept of a right-wing Israeli suicide bomber is plausible for being used in carrying out false flags for Israel's contingency. Because on October 18, 1983, a 22-year-old man named Israel Rabinowitz, who had arrived in the U.S. 2 weeks prior carrying an Israeli passport, was arrested attempting to bomb the U.S. Capitol with 2 drink bottles filled with a powdered substance attached to his belt, wired to an operating detonation cap while approached in the House gallery by officers for acting suspicious, where then he threatened to blow up the building. Police were able to detain him and he was charged for threatening to kidnap a person or cause bodily harm. And like the same old story we've heard before, he was eventually deported back to Israel a couple months later. In fact, the concept of a devoutly religious Israeli suicide bomber was made into a blockbuster Israeli motion picture in late 2000 called Time of Favor. The Hebrew language movie was not only a major hit, but also captured 6 awards in Israel. It's a drama about an Orthodox rabbinical student who, when rebuffed in romance, launches a plan to place explosives under Israel's Temple Mount, a long-standing point of connection between Israel and the Muslim world, which then accidentally becomes thwarted last minute, almost reactivating and turning into a suicide bombing or mission. Time of Favor was scheduled for release in New York theaters in September of 2001, but in the wake of the September attacks that rocked the Big Apple, the premiere was shelved. And looking at 9/11, some have suggested the possibility that 3 of the hijacked flights involved could have been carried out by Israelis taking on a suicide mission, either posing as passengers or even in combination disguised with a real team cell of Muslim Arab hijackers, a suggestion based on accent of hijackers' voice and early misreporting of hijackers' identities either being reported alive or the inconsistent chain of evidence for 14 of the hijackers boarding their flights from Boston Logan and Newark airports. By all these examples, we are not suggesting such an outsourced suicide mission or plan was carried out by Israel within the 9/11 attacks. But we are advocating that the attacks to take down the World Trade Center did mutate from Ramzi Yousef's original intention, already morphed with the Bojinka Plot, and that in fact its method of crashing planes was in some part inspired by Japanese kamikaze pilots during World War II, but no differently than the wide range of nostalgic cinematic influence of yesteryear has had on all cultures. But Israel's sacred terrorism must be fairly analyzed and compared no matter how uncomfortably similar it is to the already familiar Islamic version of it. This is set to demonstrate the possibility of how both these worlds will and can overlap, whether each side knows it or not all the time, and that essentially the American conspiracy theorist activist is not recognizing the underlying problems of international organized crime. I mean, think about it. Westernized, college educations, wearing Armani suits, hanging out in strip bars in the Philippines and Thailand? Does that sound like a fundamentalist Muslim to you? After the capture and arrest of Ramzi Yousef's cousin in Karachi 2003, Ammar al-Baluchi, he was kept in custody at an undisclosed location until 2006 when he was transferred to Guantanamo Bay. He was listed as a ghost detainee in the CIA prison system by Human Rights Watch in 2005. During al-Baluchi's secret detention, he was tortured under so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. Officials reported al-Baluchi was tortured and forcibly dunked into a tub filled with ice water, repeatedly hit with a truncheon-like object, and smashing his head to a wall. His torturous interrogation was fictionalized and depicted in the 2012 movie Zero Dark 30. It is said that al-Baluchi had a copy of a bin Laden letter to a Saudi scholar in his pocket, a computer disk containing a draft letter to him, 2 images of the September 11th attacks, and a perfume bottle containing a low concentrate of cyanide. He was also accused of discussing possibilities of exporting explosives to U.S. textile companies, but then claimed at having no knowledge of such conversation. He is also fluent in English and worked at his uncle KSM's honey processing company in Karachi for a brief period before being hired in 1998 as a computer technician for Modern Electronics Corporation in Dubai. According to some evidence given at the Combatant Status Review Tribunal, he was very open-minded and Western-oriented, while his ex-wife Afia Siddiqui told investigators differently. Al-Baluchi requested his statements be garnered from MEC that would testify he had no connections to militant forces, and that his employee records would show that he left days before 9/11 due to work permit being expired when MEC closed its branch in Dubai. The judge ruled it irrelevant, and the tribunal did not locate al-Baluchi's former MEC employees, but he submitted 2 statements written as to what he believed his MEC co-workers and his Israeli roommates would say. Israeli roommates? I don't know about you, but does it sound like al-Baluchi may have been set up? From what we've gathered so far about the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and what is widely known about the alternative 9/11 conspiracy theories, and without clear indication of where KSM was born, what ethnicity, and also in the same likes with Yousef, added with those kept close around him, as then later with Ammar al-Baluchi, by this revelation, added with occupations and sources of income, could also mean that this so-called mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, that's also currently in Gitmo right now, may just be an organized crime figure within the Arab underworld with a genuine hatred towards the U.S. he sought revenge for, or could have been all of that, as well as an Israeli Mossad asset working ubiquitously for or within the loose base, aka Al-Qaeda.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM, confessed to masterminding the 9/11 attacks from A to Z in a highly dubious, heavily redacted confession extracted after 4 years of torture in a secret CIA prison, and after having his sons abducted and used as bargaining chips in the interrogation process.
In 2006, KSM confessed to murdering Wall Street journalist Daniel Pearl.
He claimed he had cut off Daniel Pearl's head with his, quote, blessed right hand. But because he'd said that while in U.S. custody, where he'd also been waterboarded, and because he'd been known to exaggerate, there'd been lingering doubts that alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had really done that. He was never charged with the crime. Now, a report that seeks to erase those doubts. Ashra Nomani was a friend and colleague of Daniel Pearl's at the Wall Street Journal. She led an exhaustive investigation by a group of Georgetown University students of Pearl's murder in Pakistan 9 years ago. The authors say they can pin the killing on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed because they analyzed an unusual technology called vein matching. They say at one point the FBI asked the CIA, who was holding Mohammed, to take a picture of his right hand. Investigators took that picture and matched it against a frame in the video of Pearl's murder. In that video, all you can see of the killer, according to this report, is his hand. The report says the vein patterns on the hand in both images were a match. The FBI won't comment on the report. The report says a man named Omar Sheikh was wrongly convicted of actually killing Pearl, though he did allegedly set up Pearl's kidnapping. It says Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was asked by a top al-Qaeda operative to get involved because the kidnappers didn't know what to do with Pearl.
At one point, this entire kidnapping could have gone a different direction, right?
What we discovered was that Omar Sheikh actually had as his original ransom note that Danny would be released. And so the case turned and became murder, but it wasn't meant to start off as a murder, and Danny was actually supposed to be released.
But the report says Khalid Sheikh Mohammed wanted to kill Daniel Pearl for propaganda.
But unlike the torture stories we've been told about KSM, and as we've demonstrated by numerous witness accounts, U.S. Secret Agent Brian Parr stated that when Ramzi was taken into custody, Yousef was friendly, he seemed relaxed, and he actually seemed eager to talk to us. So are these individuals known as KSM and Yousef really who they are? Are they Arabs, or are they Muslims?
And let
me ask you, I mean, you've been answering a lot of questions lately about the newsletters that were published under your name, and some of the things contained in them were conspiracy theories. Some of the stuff was very incendiary, and, you know, saying that in 1993 the Israelis were responsible for the bombing of the World Trade Center.
In his 2013 book, False Flags Template for Terror, author Michael Collins Piper wrote in comparison between 9/11 and the 93 bombing with KSM, Yousef, and companion Ajaj, if the uncle and nephew teams really are Arabs and or Muslims, the fact that nephew Yousef was working closely with a reported Israeli intelligence asset in the first World Trade Center attack is still noteworthy indeed, particularly since the Israeli asset in question was himself an Arab. So is it wrong and controversial for few daring investigative journalists, researchers, and officials, regardless of present Arab or Muslim involvement, but to speculate or conclude that the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was in some part, or if not in total, an Israeli Mossad operation? Especially those who are able to stick around 8.5 years later on the day of 9/11 with the arrest of the dancing Israelis? And if that claim was supposed to be discounted, only then to be vindicated in 2009 when New York Times reported that Flight 93's hijacker pilot, Ziad Jarrah, has a cousin named Ali who was arrested in Lebanon for having been a Mossad spy for 25 years? And also in the days after the attacks, his immediate family refused to believe Ziad was even a fundamentalist or hijacked Flight 93? And then none of the flight crew and passengers witnessed 4 hijackers, only that there were 3 hijackers on Flight 93?
There's 3 guys who hijacked the plane.
You know, he said his plane had been hijacked by 3 men.
He told me that 3 people had taken over the flight.
There are 3 men that say they have a bomb.
She said my flight had just been hijacked by 3 guys with knives.
While the cockpit voice recorder, which was played to victims' families of Flight 93 during the Zacharias Moussaoui trial, and detailed that Saeed Al-Ghamdi was in the cockpit piloting, and not Ziad Jarrah? And how can we forget his Egyptian confidant Mohammed Atta, the proposed leader of the attacks, who not only had Mossad agents posing as art students living next door to him in Florida, but is also the first believed to be living hijacker after 9/11, due to the fact that his father got a phone call from him after the attacks, in which he also concluded and said who was ultimately responsible, and his once pink-haired stripper girlfriend Amanda Keller, who not only partook in drinking alcohol and doing lines of cocaine, but had also said that he could speak Hebrew? Regardless if these guys ever hung out in mosques, these guys liked to party, just like Ramzi Yousef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed did. But neither of these figures are serious enough and actually fit the profile to take on a suicide mission. But in reality, they certainly likely knew how and where to find those who would. So in hindsight around the 93 bombing, it was not a wild accusation to charge such a claim for involvement by the Israeli Mossad or Jewish organized crime. A prime example again, going back to the late world-renowned author on Jewish intrigue, Michael Collins Piper, who wrote in his first book in the mid-90s, Final Judgment, The Missing Link in the JFK Assassination, which was banned in several countries due to its controversial implications underlying the Mossad and Jewish organized crime. Yet in 1994, a year before William Kunstler passed away, he wrote an autobiography titled My Life as a Radical Lawyer, which he certainly was when looking at all the high-profile cases that he defended, which coincidentally was also briefly this guy. Jacob Rubenstein, aka Jack Ruby.
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
Well, not exactly. According to Kunstler's biography describing Ruby as a violent and mentally unstable person paranoid of pogroms and anti-Semitism, it states, "When Jack told me he killed Oswald for the Jews, I believed him. On each of the 3 occasions we talked, he said, 'Bill, I did this so they wouldn't implicate Jews.' Lee Harvey Oswald had belonged to Fair Play for Cuba, an organization with a number of Jewish members. Because of this association of Oswald, Jack's convoluted thinking led him to believe that the Kennedy assassination would be linked to Jews. So did Kunstler's speculations and findings on Emad Salem serve some merit for his cases on entrapment for the landmark plot bombers, and or possibly being a Mossad or Egyptian asset, with closer oversight of the 1993 bombing than he proclaimed?
FBI informant Emad Salem met us at Ground Zero and talked to us for the first time about why he risked his life to help the U.S. stop Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman and his followers from bombing New York.
The original plan that we should blow the bomb on December, which Christmas Day, to spoil the American Christmas.
It was 1992 and Salem warned the FBI, but after he told agents he would never testify in open court and polygraphs on him were inconclusive, Salem and the FBI parted ways. But members of the terror cell again reached out to Salem, and again he went to authorities about how the terrorists were speaking in code. The sheikh was furious that his right-hand man was actually an FBI informant, and Salem says the sheikh later threatened him in the courtroom.
He said, "You're Satan," and of course everybody knows what they should do for the Satan. Working undercover is not an easy task, especially with people who have no mercy. The guy is bad news anywhere he is. As long as he is alive, people get killed.
FBI informant Emad Salem came out of hiding to warn about Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman and how leaders like the President of Egypt continue to press for the Sheikh's freedom, while leaders from the Persian Gulf nation of Qatar have requested the Sheikh be transferred out of the U.S.
When we gonna wake up and smell the coffee? This man is dangerous in prison. What will happen when he's out of prison? If we today release him, or like the State Department say, transfer him, is he going to be grateful to us? Absolutely not. He will kill Americans. He will kill anybody who will dispute what he say with a fatwa.
I'm going to tell you one thing. I'm following Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman very closely. And sadly, for the first time since 20 years ago, he was taken out of prison, put in a hospital to prepare for his, what they call it, transfer. At the beginning, the State Department said, "Oh, we're going to release him." And then the media went crazy. You cannot release the guy, has American blood on his hand. Oh, well, we will transfer him. And then, this is ridiculous.
Shouldn't he have just been executed?
Aside that it would be regarded cruel and unusual punishment executing a blind man, for a truth seeker or independent journalist, if Alex Jones ever had any credibility to be labeled as one, who has nearly spent 2 decades blaming the 1993 bombing on the FBI, self-proclaiming it to be the concern which initiated his platform, it would be extremely clumsy if not crass to suggest capital punishment on the central suspect of the unresolved conspiracy, only to then obstruct one from puzzling the rest of the unsolved crime.
I will bet you something here. We have 2 or a year and 3/4 left for Mr. Barak. He will release the Sheikh before he leave office to shut the Muslim Brotherhood forever. And you can quote me on that.
Well, that doesn't end up happening because the blind sheikh ends up dying a couple of years later in 2017. But what is the overall message here from Emad with the blind sheikh being a threat in either case, whether if he remains incarcerated or set free? Wouldn't logic tell us that the danger would cease or decrease once the blind sheikh passes?
And the sheikh was convicted. He went to jail for many years. He just died this year. How does that make you feel? And is the world, do you think that we're going to enter a more peaceful time, or are there other people like the sheikh who have already taken this place?
On the contrary, I think we are in more dangerous before the blind sheikh passed away, because a week before he passed away, he wrote his last will and testament, and he ordered his followers to revenge for him, quote unquote, violent revenge. The blind sheikh had followers on the American streets today. They are waiting for the opportunity to have a violent revenge for his death.
He sounds like a very decisive fearmonger.
This is a crucial point. It was not a black flag operation. It's not a false operation. It's a real crazy idiots, fanatics who wanted to commit jihad under the leadership of the blind sheikh.
I want to be clear and not split hairs here, Colonel.
Yeah, you would call it splitting hairs when it's ultimately conflicting with your dogmatic foundation as a shock jock radio host. But of course, Jones refuses to challenge Emad and just follows up attempting to explain his deficient interpretation of what a false flag is, which contrasts to what the 1993 World Trade Center bombing really was, as yet Salem at this point is still a questionable witness and source.
So I wouldn't throw the blame on the FBI, period. The listeners and you would like to understand, because I was there. I walked the walk and I talk the talk, and I am not afraid of nobody. If I am afraid, I wouldn't go undercover with assassins and evildoers.
So nearly a year later, on the cusp of Alex Jones's historical interview with Donald Trump, Emad has a second interview with Jones on November 19, 2015, where now Jones has changed his overall narrative of what the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was.
I mean, he was there, he tried to stop it, and was ordered to stand down. That's even been in the New York Times.
Well, Alex, unfortunately, if we allow this group of Sunni Wahhabist people to enter into our land, there is no doubt in my mind that it will happen again. We already got attacked in 1993 by the same group. However, different name, it's all the same ideology. But again, I don't know if our government wanted that to happen again, to start to take our liberty out of our hand more and more and put more restriction on the media. And then they will say, oops, it happened again. And they let these people to start to hurt the American people, to give them a reason to start to monitor more and to take our liberty out of our hands. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am afraid that if they allow these people to walk in, that's going to be a false flag operation to let them bomb America. And then they say, oops, they bomb America. We have to monitor America more and take your guns and take your liberty and take even the mainstream media today start to be controlled by the government.
But of course, Salem doesn't want to spoil it for Jones's lucrative fear-mongering, and he certainly didn't want to give it away that he unexpectedly resonates with Jones's anti-Obama position.
Well, this is one of the policies Mr. Obama trying to do. He is trying to control everybody in America, taking your rights, taking your guns, stripping you from your rights so he can control you. You cannot defend yourself. You cannot stand up for your rights. Mr. Barack Obama's upbringing with a father who believed in fanaticism to the point that he named his first son Malik on God's name and the second son Barak, which is the right of Prophet Muhammad. Mr. Barak's heart is a Muslim. I have no problem with that because I am a Muslim myself. But don't go to the fanatics, take them off a terrorist list, start supporting them, and then I have to pay the price as an American citizen. We are paying the price for increasing the power of the Muslim Brotherhood. You mentioned the Kenyan connection with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that shows in Mr. Obongo Obama. Mr. Obongo Obama is Mr. Barack Hussein's brother in Kenya, and he is the main support line for the Muslim Brotherhood in Africa. Unfortunately, the Muslim Brotherhood start to blackmail Mr. Obama, and you can see the headline in Al Ahram newspaper that the Muslim Brotherhood warning Mr. Obama not to withdraw his support from them, or they're going to release documentation to jeopardize his throne. If you see the intelligence on the Egyptian streets today, you can see how they portray Mr. Obama, how they portrayed him with the big beard and a turban, and they asking him to stop his support to the Muslim Brotherhood.
For someone who likes to pride himself about being an American and a Muslim, he sure sounds ungrateful that one has now been finally provided to him as our elected leader.
I want to go back to Mr. Obama's first speech in Egypt, in Cairo, Egypt. The first visit when he went there, and he said to the Muslim Brotherhood, I am sorry for what America had done. I don't understand what is Mr. Obama apologizing for. America was a great deal of help to Egypt at that time. We were giving the Egyptian military $1.5 billion by the B dollars as an asset, as an help with their military. Obama has apologizing about what America is doing, bringing democracy and trying to bring peace into the Middle East. Mr. Obama used to sit in his church, listen for his minister, Mr. Wright, when he was damning America, when he's attacking America, and he accepted that and attended the church for years and years. And once he got the opportunity to become the president of the United States, he started to castrate the power of America. Mr. President, you castrated the American military and the American influence around the world, and we are not helping even our allies in the countries in the Middle East. On the contrary, he is trying to say that he is fighting the war, but we are making only 5 bombings a day versus 1,000, and more than 1,000 a day at the time when we were fighting real fight. Mr. Obama, unfortunately, you weakened our country. You are not helping us.
And neither were you, and surprisingly Alex Jones, by propagating this phony war on terror and expansions in the Middle East. I don't know about you, but doesn't Emad Salem sound practically like a neoconservative?
And if Mr. Obama really loves the Syrian people, what did he do when the Syrian people got gassed by Mr. Bashar al-Assad? What did he do about his red line to Mr. Assad if he gassed his people? This is not America, which I put my life and my family's life on the line for. Mr. Obama, please, please help America. Don't weaken America. America can lead the world. America cannot be led by Russia. Russia today have influence in the Middle East, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria.
Oh yeah, definitely a neocon.
Unfortunately, that's the price the American people, you and I, will pay. That we get alienated from the Middle East, and when we go ask them to help us to fight ISIS, of course they say, if you coming to support a terrorist organization called the Muslim Brotherhood, you coming now, one of the tails of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is ISIS, you want us to help you fight it? Sorry. And they walk away. And they went far from the United States to get their weapons from Russia and from China. And then, lo and behold, Russia will start to spread their wings on the Middle East, and we lose our leadership role around the world. America, I immigrated to, is the United States of America, and it is the supreme power on the planet, and we should maintain that. Increase the military power and increase our leadership around the planet.
Supreme power on the planet? Sounds like a warmonger to me.
I was happy to infiltrate people who are followers of the blind sheikh, because the blind sheikhs commit the biggest catastrophe to my life, assassinating my president on my watch. I was 300 to 400 feet from the stage where he was assassinated, because I was among the troops securing the parade. I was so very angry, and I promised him revenge.
And that's because President Sadat made the first attempts to make peace with the arch enemy Israel. Is that correct?
Well, it was not an attempt. I mean, he was fought tooth and nail by the Arab leaders not to make this deal, but he stood his ground, and he believed that Israeli people have the rights to live, Egyptian people have rights to live, there is no war anymore, and we're going to make peace, period.
Zionist?
The Muslim Brotherhood, as I said, comes from the roots, or they are the roots of ISIS. If you go to the ISIS tree, it started from the bottom as Hassan al-Banna, and then after him it came Ayman Zawahiri, and then Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, and then it came a point when somebody by the name Mohammed Abdul Salam. Mohammed Abdul Salam is the first one who switched the Muslim Brotherhood from being an organization fighting the British occupation during the Nasser era into a violent organization, and they attempted to assassinate Gamal Abdel Nasser. They attempted to assassinate Anwar Sadat until the blind sheikh succeeded to do it, and he was elected the Prince of Jihad on the global level.
He is the Prince of Jihad, and he will continue to be.
And what is your advice? What can we do today in this situation that we find ourselves in with the terrorists? Why do they hate us so much? What can we do to change the situation?
I think from my way of infiltrating this group of people, I dissected their personalities. They're saying, Allahu Akbar, God is great. And they are doing what God wants them to do. But the reality is they are after two things. One, domination, which is power. Two, money, period. It came a day when I saw the blind sheikh having 63,000 US dollars in a piece of newspaper wrapped, give it to Muntasir al-Zayyat, his Egyptian attorney, and he said, give this lil-Hagga, al-Hagga, which is his wife. Next morning, I contacted my Egyptian intelligence friends in Egypt. I said, Muntasir al-Zayyat coming back to Cairo, he have a newspaper wrapped under his clothes from the blind sheikh. I think it has some instruction to his followers. And in my conversation with them, they always say, let us to make them live in terror. And nothing beat terror but terror. So we have to do military, and there is no mercy here. And on the background, we have to fight the ideology. The ideology starts since you are 4 or 5 years old. They plant in your mind that your enemy are the Jews. The Jews are a bunch of pigs and sons of apes. And even when I was growing up in Egypt, all the caricatures in the newspaper used to be showing the Israeli guy have a bullseye eyes and have horns and tails. And when I met some of this Israeli in 1993 war, they had no horns, they have no tails. They're humans, want to live like we live. And when I met some of this Israeli in 1993 war,
So is this just merely crocodile tears?
I felt guilty for so long that there is 6 people died on my watch. I could have protected them.
Well, I lived with that guilt for so long, and I still feel guilty. That's why when I wrote my first book, Undercover, I dedicated the book to the 6 victims who got killed in 1993 bombing by name in the front page.
Looking back on everything from 93 to 9/11, being himself in the middle of its origin, Emad Salem is deeply invested in protecting the official versions, which is tremendously counter to Alex Jones's platform, who had long promoted the 1993 World Trade Center bombing as a domestic operation, even claiming it as one of his founding wake-up calls, an inside job, as he still does for 9/11. But few have seen this Salem interview. Right before his second appearance on Jones's show, he did an interview with New York 9/11 truth activist Sander Hicks, where not only did Emad spend a great majority of the interview laying out the official narratives pre- and post-1993, even suggesting Muhammad Atta was taking orders from Osama bin Laden, but unlike other interviews, Sander, with limited time and wanting to shift the conversation into areas of 9/11 that conflict with the official story, boldly went straight to this.
So I have a couple of other questions I wanted to run by you. It seems like you know a lot about 9/11, and it's great to talk to as somebody who's been inside the FBI. What do you know? Have you looked into Mossad, the Israeli connection? There was an arrest of several celebrating Israeli.
Who is full of explosive.
Right, the moving van guys. There were guys from Israel who were videotaping the attacks, and they were holding up cigarette lighters like it's a rock concert, and they were high-fiving each other. And they were arrested by New Jersey state troopers, and then were released, and they got back to Israel, and they were on Israeli television. This is what really...
There are two different groups. The people who were high-fiving each other, watching the planes hitting, videotaping them, these people were not they were not arrested, and they went back to Israel, and they submitted interviews to the Israeli TV, and they acknowledged that they were taping the interview, the bombing of the 1991 World Trade Center.
2001.
2001.
Right.
Israel is so powerful in the United States. Nobody will deny that. And is Israel spying on the United States? Absolutely. I have an intimate knowledge of that.
Yeah, I think William Kunstler was definitely onto something with his own investigations. Even with Salem's advantage of being in a position of deniability, and federal authorities not entirely being forthcoming, Salem was never considered trustworthy since the beginning. And just by examining a fuller-length recording of the public Salem and Anticev tape, rather than just a sensationalized soundbite taken out of context, Salem was obviously an extortionist in regards to getting paid for his services, and could have easily accepted other bids by organized interests, and had actually had oversight of the operation, making certain or even alerting Egyptian intelligence at the bare minimum that the bombing was going forward. Given with so many links left to explore, we need to come to a closing, but we encourage viewers to check out the entire original documentaries we've collected in this compendium film for themselves. But here are some other points of suspect regarding 1993 that we didn't get to cover at all, or as much as we'd like to, such as what former ABC News correspondent Peter Lance has documented thoroughly with the case of Ali Mohammed, who worked as a double agent for the CIA in Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and first came into the U.S. as a translator for Ayman Zawahiri's first U.S. tour of mosques. After being recruited from CIA offices in Cairo, he then later moved and enlisted in U.S. Special Forces. Not only did he train anti-Soviet Afghan Mujahideen in the early 90s, he trained al-Qaeda volunteers and allegedly Osama bin Laden and al-Zawahiri. While in the U.S., he trained Sayyid Nosair and Mohammed Abouhalima, which is why after the Meir Kahane assassination, with all the army training manuals found at Nosair's place, Ali already became a person of interest to U.S. authorities even before 1993. He was later charged with the East Africa embassy bombings before attempting to leave the U.S. in 1998. In addition to his native Arabic, incidentally,
he's adventurous and well-educated, fluent in English, French, Arabic, and Hebrew.
And then there's Abdul Rahman Yasin, who gets little attention although still wanted by the FBI for the 93 bombing somehow. Yasin was born in Bloomington, Indiana by Iraqi parents, and then shortly after moved to Iraq where he was raised there, until he moved back to the U.S. in 1992, likely as a result from the first Gulf War the previous year. He was arrested the same day as Mohammed Salameh was for the bombing, found living downstairs in a New Jersey apartment he shared with his mother, from where both he and Yousef once lived. He was taken back to FBI headquarters and was very cooperative, having given immense details of where the bomb was built in New York and New Jersey, essentially admitting that he had oversight, and even gone on as far as assisted in building the bomb, aside for loading it onto the van which he had witnessed Ramzi and the other conspirators do. As soon as he was released the following month in March, he fled back to Iraq and he was eventually imprisoned there in 1994 by authorities. And as 1997 rolled around, as all the main 93 bombing suspects were being convicted in New York, Yasin was the only suspect believed to be directly involved remaining at large, while the State Department did nothing about it while they had been informed by the Iraqi emissary who were prepared to cooperate with any legal proceedings to hand him over.
Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz. He says that Iraq has been trying to turn Yasin over to the United States. But he claims the government in Washington doesn't want the $25 million fugitive.
Twice we asked them to come and take him. They refused, which means that they are not sincere in what they are saying. They are not honest in what they are saying, you see.
The initial offer to turn Yasin over, he says, occurred during the Clinton administration in 1994, a year after that first attack on the World Trade Center.
We informed the American government that we have important information about that event. If you are interested, send a team to Baghdad to get that information.
They actually sent an emissary to the State Department to make the offer.
They did not reply. They did not reply at all, and they did not...
But your information was very vague. wasn't it?
Yeah, but we showed our goodwill.
But would you really expect them to respond to that?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that we fear that sending Yasin back to Iraq after arresting him and interrogating him was a sting operation.
You thought that the Americans were trying to sting you by sending him back?
Yes.
But for what purpose?
To tell people later on that, look, this man who participated in that event now is in Iraq, etc., and use it as they are doing now, using many false pretexts, you see, to hurt Iraq in their own way.
To suggest that Iraq was involved in the bombing?
Yes, yes.
So you were very suspicious that he was some kind of plant or...
We have the right to be suspicious of the American intentions.
He says their suspicions were borne out after September 11th, when Yasin was put on the most wanted list.
His ethnicity being of Iraqi descent has been exploited by neoconservative propagandists like Judith Miller cohort Lori Milroy to claim that there was an Iraqi Saddam connection in 1993 and to Osama bin Laden even before 9/11, due to the proximity of Ramzi Yousef's alleged birthplace and the fact that he first entered the U.S. with a fake Iraqi passport. And we certainly didn't spin an overview with the peculiar circumstances of the legal defense with Mohammed Salameh, Nidal Ayyad, and those in addition who fled like Mohammed Abouhalima the Red and the Jordanian Iyad Ismail, and an even further extension with the landmark plot bombers aside Siddig Ali, but with the American-born Clement Romney Hampton L, and those others closer to the blind sheik, like the follow-up stories with Ahmad Abdel Sattar and attorney Lynn Stewart. But what about what Ramzi Yousef said in his only interview to Al Hayat newspaper after his sentencing, about a new Islamic militant group that would rise up and challenge the U.S.? Regardless of official narrative with the manifestation of Al-Qaeda, by so many unanswered questions and cover-ups of that and regarding the destruction of the World Trade Center, Ramzi Yousef certainly could not have been declaring vengeance be carried out under the limited and official scope of only 19 hijackers and 4 airliners. So was Yousef warning of someone else finishing out the total third phase of the Bojinka Plot? Has 9/11? Regardless of targets, or if there was someone else behind Yousef, KSM, or even Osama bin Laden, how serious of a roster of hijacker teams were there, as even what Colonel Mendoza forewarned about actually might have been possible in the original 9/11 attacks? If you want an answer to this, watch my film Bojinka Plot Confirmed, The Thwarted Hijackings of 9/11 and 9/13. But how come bin Laden's brother-in-law, Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, who in December of 1994 was detained for several months without bail in Northern California on charges related to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, where he suddenly was deported to Jordan to face a conviction for a sting of theater bombings, which in happenstance his conviction was already overturned due to witness recanting their testimony. Khalifa then left for the Philippines and returned to Saudi Arabia, where authorities claim he was found to have been funding the Bojinka Plot by 5 phone numbers of his found at the Joseph apartment in Manila, where Yousef's bomb factory and laptop was found after the apartment fire. If they were able to prove Osama bin Laden's brother was involved with the Bojinka Plot, where Yousef and his uncle KSM were certainly at, then why haven't the FBI been able to prove bin Laden was behind 9/11 and only have him charged still for the USS Cole, East Africa embassy bombings, and small terrorist attacks throughout Africa and the Middle East, and not 9/11? And in contrast to the greatly unapproachable, widely publicized, and controversial detainment of so-called Al-Qaeda terrorist detainees at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, what about the more approachable Al-Qaeda criminals at the ADX Supermax Prison in Colorado, where not only Ramzi Yousef is being held with some of the 1993 conspirators, but also those from the 1998 East Africa embassy bombings?
We've learned that Reed, seen here in his cell, is in a special wing for terrorists called H Unit. Others include Zacarias Moussaoui, who wanted to be one of the 9/11 hijackers, and Wadi El-Haj, Osama bin Laden's former private secretary. We're told that there have been frequent hunger strikes among the Islamic terrorist inmates inside Supermax, and to keep the inmates alive, there are often force feedings. That's when an inmate is restrained and liquid nourishment is poured down a tube in his nose. We're told that there have been a dozen hunger strikers, and one of them used to be Osama bin Laden's secretary.
Not only was El-Haj bin Laden's secretary and an East Africa embassy bombing conspirator, he's another Lebanese Al-Qaeda militant like supposed Flight 93 9/11 hijacker Ziad Jarrah, who also originally came from a Lebanese Christian family. And interestingly, upon El-Haj's arrest, he was said to have been found with an Israeli passport. How does an Al-Qaeda operative get an Israeli passport? And also, Zacarias Moussaoui, that's also said to have purchased Ziad Jarrah's plane ticket separate from the 3 other Flight 93 hijackers while attending flight school in Oklahoma, is also, as of last year in July, to have gone on hunger strikes at ADX Supermax.
Another terrorist in Supermax is Ramzi Yousef, the leader of the first World Trade Center attack in 1993.
What did you make of him?
The most interesting inmate in my career. I was surprised that he was extremely respectful, prayed almost on the hour.
Yousef has been living in ADX for 11 years, sacrificing to live by his own code.
Something as simple as recreating. He would have to be strip searched to go recreate. He chose not to do that because of his belief that it'd be inappropriate for us to show his body or see his body.
And so he stays in the cell?
Never been out, to my knowledge.
As strict as that seems, we're told that there is an even higher level of confinement, sort of an ultramax inside Supermax. It's a group of cells where there is virtually no human contact, not even with the guards, and there are only 2 prisoners who are considered so dangerous that they're locked in this place that's known as Range 13. One of them is World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Yousef. Warden Hood says Yousef is on Range 13 for just one reason.
He has a Charlie Manson look.
Charlie Manson look?
He just has the eyes. He has some charisma about him. He's in uniform, but you know that there's a powerful person that you're looking at.
You didn't want him in a place where he could give anybody any orders.
True.
We're told something strange is happening with Yousef. He now insists that he has renounced Islam and converted to Christianity. He's even begun leaving his cell for exercise. Warden Hood left before all this happened, but still, he doesn't buy it.
He's playing a game with someone. If he's doing that, he's doing it for the reaction. He's doing it for whatever. He is the real deal.
There have been some new developments at Supermax. There have been more hunger strikes and force feedings, and both Tommy Silverstein and Ramzi Yousef have been moved to new cells, which leaves Range 13 empty, at least for now.
And there have been quite a few other developments since that 60 Minutes piece in 2007. Yousef has also put out a hit on Zacarias Moussaoui. According to letters Moussaoui wrote requesting transfer to Gitmo because he had been assaulted and harassed by other inmates and guards, including Ramzi Yousef, who has threatened to kill him. Obviously, everybody who's gotten close enough to Yousef that we've demonstrated so far seems to certify that he does not fit the fanatical Muslim persona, even if he adapted to it soon after incarceration. He's consistently deceiving people, and he resonates as being a sociopath. And we can't simply ignore what a whistleblower like former National Security Advisor to the Bush administration, Richard Clarke, as what he said in regards to the unlikely coincidence of Terry Nichols being in the Philippines the same time Ramzi Yousef was.
We know that Terry Nichols and Ramzi Yousef, both people were in the same city at the same time. That's odd. Both people were interested in making bombs. Both people opposed the American government. Is it conceivable that in a mid-sized Philippine city, that 2 people who were interested in making bombs and hated the American government could have found each other somehow? I think it's conceivable.
What we've seen so far tells us the major significance ADX Supermax has over Gitmo. But how unsettling does this coincidence sound when Terry Nichols is also incarcerated along with Yousef there? Unsettling enough that even former Congressman Dana Rohrabacher actually went to meet Nichols and held a press conference about his obstructions to interview Ramzi Yousef.
I have been denied for a year and a half now the right to speak to a federal prisoner, namely Ramzi Yousef. He's one of the top terrorists of the world, and he's been in prison for 10 years. He was responsible for the first World Trade Center bombing and is deeply, deeply involved with the creation of Al-Qaeda. What's more important to me at this moment is that Ramzi Yousef may have had a connection to the Oklahoma City bombing, and if that's true, the American people need to know about that. And there are other questions that need to be posed to Ramzi Yousef. He's a federal prisoner, and the United States Congress, especially those of us in investigative subcommittees, have a right to question federal prisoners. This is not someone who was just arrested yesterday, where there's some ongoing investigation that deals with this person. He's been in jail for 10 years. What we have is a denial of the right of Congress in order to set a precedent that we do not have the right to interview federal prisoners. The official reason that I have been denied the right to speak to Ramzi Yousef is that there is a, quote, ongoing investigation. And of course, I have been told by many people who work for the Justice Department and the White House that that is a standard phrase that is used to dismiss congressional inquiries without any substance to the dismissal, meaning this is made up. The person who said that it is an ongoing investigation to me simply said that as a phrase to dismiss a member of Congress and to dismiss Congress's right to participate in a particular activity, like interviewing this particular federal prisoner.
Aside the 8.5-year interval between 9/11 and the 93 bombing, with the Oklahoma City bombing being right in the middle, how can these three areas and events not be covered in archetypal truth movement, definitively pursuing total accountability and exposing those who continue to cover up? And besides for 1995 being framed as a white militia conspiracy, Oklahoma and the Midwest with Texas as a central hub noted for Islamic terrorism ahead of 9/11, as a couple of hijackers stayed in Oklahoma City before, momentarily, including Mohammed Atta. But the presence there is more prevalent in the past by the same apparatus before in the late 80s, like with Wali Al-Haj, who was living in Texas at the time, met up with Mohammed Abouhalima at an Islamic conference in Oklahoma, where it is said Abouhalima told Al-Haj to buy a .38 caliber revolver for him, and that it was the same one that Nosair used to kill Meir Kahane. And how about Yousef's close friend Abdel Hakim Murad? Not only did he receive pilot training more than any 9/11 hijacker, he had also trained in San Antonio and is completely in the middle of the Bojinka Plot, where then after the Oklahoma City bombing, he admitted verbally on April 19, 1995 and in writing that Ramzi Yousef's Liberation Army was responsible for the OKC bombing. Liberation Army is the same title Nidal Ayyad had left as a phone recorded message taking blame for the 93 World Trade Center bombing. And how can we forget Hussein al-Husseini, the supposed Iraqi that's the focus in Jana Davis's book, The Third Terrorist? Regardless of her marginalizing other competing theories about the Oklahoma City bombing, her pursuit was just, even if embraced by attempts of neocon opportunists. The consequence of legal actions taken against her by the power of al-Hussein's legal team should be questioned, especially when it was later revealed that al-Husseini was working at Logan Airport, where hijacked flights 11 and 175, both planes that hit the World Trade Center, departed from, during the period of the September 11th attacks, and was even questioned by authorities after. Aside for the glaring coincidence of Ryder moving vehicles, isn't it interesting how Emad Salem detailed that the bomb for the World Trade Center in 1993 and the Oklahoma City bomb in 1995 were similar, being both ammonium nitrate fertilizer bombs? But isn't it also interesting that between that time frame, the same type of ammonium nitrate bomb was used in 1994 at the AMIA, that's the Argentine Israelite Mutual Association building in Buenos Aires, by a suicide bomber in a van, in which killed 85 people and injured over 300? And how come Iran and Hezbollah were first blamed for the bombing, as they are constantly falsely accused for other terrorist attacks elsewhere? Why in 1984, soon after Ali Mohammed offered his services to the CIA in Cairo, was he stationed in Hamburg, East Germany, and assigned to infiltrate mosques associated to Hezbollah? Why a month after 9/11 did the Bush administration offer a $5 million reward leading to the arrest of Hezbollah members in the 1985 hijacking of TWA 847, especially when one of them was already in U.S. custody since 1987, captured member Fawaz Yunus? And yet 7 years later, one of its main conspirators and leaders, Imad Mughniya, who had been able to hide for decades, even gone under plastic surgery to change his identity, ended up getting assassinated in Syria by the Mossad in 2008 with the help of infiltrating spy Ali Jar, Flight 93 hijacker Ziad Jar's cousin. And looking back at these two Lebanese, Jar and El-Haj, both originally coming from Arab Christian backgrounds, is part of the Mossad's playbook specifically using Lebanese assets so that it's easier to set them up as a pretext to frame Hezbollah? Also, what about Mossad asset Ajaj? How do we know for certain that he may have been a Palestinian Christian when he was involved in the 93 bombing? Because only as of recent he has been shown to have been strictly practicing Islam and suing the prison for failing to accommodate to his religious beliefs.
All right, the terrorist convicted in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing is now suing the United States.
He says his religious rights are being violated in prison because his meals aren't catered to his Islamic beliefs.
There's much more that needs to be explored with Ajaj, as even PBS Frontline themselves highlighted that without him and the items that he carried when arriving at JFK Airport with Yousef in 1992, there would be no premise to label such a loose network as Al-Qaeda. as demonstrated on their special about the late head of FBI Terrorism Task Force, John O'Neill. And like Iyad Ishmael, who suddenly appears after in the '93 bombing conspiracy, Ajaj had also previously lived in Texas working as a pizza deliverer before entering the U.S. again in 1992. Essentially, he could be considered the bombing mastermind of 1993, being that he was also in a prime position while detained to make orders, since Yousef wasn't able to entirely set up the bomb without Ajaj's manuals and experience. And from the bombing attempts that we have charted from Yousef, most of them were unsuccessful. But why, after Ajaj's release from an Israeli prison and turned into a Mossad asset, was he assigned to Al-Fatah, a group known to receive weapons, explosives, and training from the Soviet Union, but then somehow, unnoticeably, he was able to join Hamas in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets. Ajaj has since been transferred from Supermax Prison to Terre Haute Prison in Indiana in 2018. And he, like many of these conspirators, are serving life sentences and are unapproachable for questions and interviews, which tells you many answers could be found on U.S. shores rather than further obstructions through Gitmo, Cuba. But luckily, that's not the situation when it comes to Pakistani Wali Khan Shah, who's also in Terre Haute and was right in the middle of the Bojinka planning. And since he has been cooperative with U.S. authorities, he's set to be free 3 years from now in March of 2022. Perhaps we may get answers to who else was behind these 90s terrorist attacks and 9/11 and how they fully functioned. But if these so-called top al-Qaeda masterminds and leaders aren't born and raised fundamentalist Muslims, just like the case with Osama bin Laden ironically, who in his early college years liked to live it up as a partying bachelor, shouldn't this all in the long run be called Arab terrorism? Isn't it also interesting, as reported by Terry McDermott on June 24, 2002, in the LA Times while KSM was still wanted, that members of his cell, including a girlfriend, had a drinking party to celebrate the anniversary of the 1988 Pan Am Flight 103 explosion over Lockerbie, Scotland, an incident officially blamed on Gaddafi and Libyan pilots, and not anything remotely to do with Al-Qaeda? Although incomplete, throughout this film we covered a lengthy time span in the 1990s, and it's needed in helping understand what we're dealing with in the kind of cover-up connections between 9/11 and 1993, which is largely unknown to 9/11 activists who have avoided becoming familiar with official terrorism narratives, such as also the Millennium Plot, as in what almost occurred during the 2000 New Year celebrations, not just in New York City and the US, but what incidents did actually take place elsewhere then, and to what's now further escalated post-millennium with 9/11 3 administrations later on, with the continued unending mess with the War on Terror. But what about the 1980s? Were there ever any early warning signs of attacking the World Trade Center back then? What was the U.S.'s approach on dealing with international terrorism? Was there ever a call for the war on terrorism then, such as the failed war on drugs? How about Europe in the 80s? Where was Islamic terrorism at then? Was there another underground network like Al-Qaeda that predates it? Why did the 1986 West Berlin discotheque bombing happen? Was Libya really responsible? How was ISIS able to manifest in Libya a decade after 9/11, while there had been an ongoing coalition with the war on terrorism? Why did Osama bin Laden really move to Sudan in 1994? What about the 70s? Who the hell is Carlos the Jackal? What was the Black September? What happened in Munich in 1972? Why does this kind of activity go back to Germany so much? These historical questions, not only pertaining to the before and after bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, do have somewhat useful answers, but they have not been thoroughly challenged within the mainstream alternative conspiracy theories or within established 9/11 truth movements when scrutinized over its popular inside job claims, in sequential contrast to 9/11 itself, when these attacks were certainly carried out on the surface definitively by a loose association of Arabs within a conventional Al-Qaeda nexus. And by default, even if given positions of deniability by feds, doesn't automatically grant reason to suspect or suggest government conspiracies or domestic complicity, but instead more to do with neglect and compartment conflicts. But none of those obstructions, given along with real anomalies still showing cover-ups, detracts that these crimes were not carried out by an ulterior international conspiracy. In other words, what Alex Jones has proclaimed for decades, misguided by those discredited sources that even predate him, and that the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was an inside job, or in his definition of a false flag, is nonsense, regardless of patriotic rhetoric and local sentiment. Retroactively, when looking back at younger Alex Jones and what seemed a sincere proclamation at the time to implicate a shadow government in what also occurred 2 years later with the Oklahoma City bombing, compared to the overview on what we've uncovered with 1993, as Israeli involvement in 9/11 is a widely accepted claim now, while Jones continues to marginalize it and outright omit it.
I've got so many questions, but you are vindicated. This has got to be the 50th time the last 6 months on the radical Muslims celebrating, not just in New Jersey, but New York,
discrediting 9/11 Truth further than what damage he already done colluding with the Truth Movement's inception, attached with promoting the hoax claim that a missile hit the Pentagon. Jones's conclusion from his first-hand investigations and publications on OKC should be equally re-examined and scrutinized, especially when he's lost more than just credibility, but now financially, with lawsuits against him regarding the bogus Sandy Hook hoax claims he instigated, which has been the catalyst of getting him deplatformed on all the major social media sites. And now with the latest so far with the public release of his deposition.
The truth is, Mr. Jones, you were the first person in the world to make the false flag theory about Sandy Hook, and you did it before the bodies were even cold. That's the truth.
Or whether it's babies having their brains bashed out in incubators or WMDs, that I upfront questioned it because things from Operation Northwoods. Well, I mean, we always covered things from a perspective of caution. We were covering other people's reports and also questioning the historical fact that things like Operation Northwoods, a government plan to stage mass shootings in the U.S. Kennedy said no to the plan, but the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had green-lighted it. And so because of things like that, we are forced to then question these events. And I think that's, it's just part of the process in this country.
Notice how Alex Jones uses Operation Northwoods as his instant reason to question everything, wielding it as his excuse to why he instigated Sandy Hook conspiracy theories, when anyone who has classically followed 9/11 Truth knows that Operation Northwoods is definitively Jones' original talking point to defend his past outlandish claims on who and how 9/11 was carried out. Such an accusation is both illogical and unusual given his age and opportunity to experience confirming and analyzing basic recent history and news. When such a notion that 9/11 was an Operation Northwoods type event is easily discarded with the crimes of Ramzi Yousef past the 93 bombing, no matter what insidious planners in the government of yesteryear or how fantastical a plan it sounds. All the history that surrounds 9/11, in addition to having previously aided the Mujahideen, gives no rhyme, no reason to disrupt a blatant pattern of specific urban international terrorism as a government conspiracy, when there's simply the Bojinka Plot.
Sandy Hook, before I was ever sued, lost money. 9/11 Truth lost me almost all my radio stations and lost money. Those type of really controversial stands, people don't like them, and they have crippled us before these lawsuits.
That rationale is simply laughable. Jones couldn't have lost money over 9/11 Truth when he had gone beyond Bush's 2 terms promoting it, producing several films, pressing books, t-shirts, and other merchandise marketed with 9/11 in the title. It is practically that crisis, along with the advent of social media, that eventually springboarded his network into major recognition. Sure, Alex Jones lost so much money that he had to go as far as co-opting the most popular of all 9/11 Truth films and produces a third and contemporary version of Loose Change, which again has all been the base of his own fear cult doctrine, that he and his loyal believers equate 9/11 to Operation Northwoods. Alex Jones is a liar, and he disturbingly has the largest audience in alternative media, and because of it, he is the victim of his own influence that has projected a tremendous mistrust in American society today and throughout parts of the world.
So you have to look at the agenda behind things, you have to balance things about why has the mainstream media lied so much, why have governments lied so much, the fact that the public doesn't believe what they're told anymore. And it really is the fact that we've allowed the government and institutions to become so corrupt that people have lost any compass of what's real. And I myself have almost had like a form of psychosis. I genuinely questioned, and I think the government and media that's been caught lying so much has created an atmosphere where people don't know what's true.
So you do not believe that you've done an outrageous wrong to these parents?
I've not done an outrageous wrong to the parents.
If you can be that callous and clumsy with real victims' family members, imagine how he truly sees those survivors, victim families, and those who still want accountability for 9/11. But in all seriousness, regardless of administrations, government, and media structures past and present, what we've demonstrated about 1993 should be thoroughly grasped by the 9/11 Truth Movement in order to make activists' case stronger in 9/11 and to also help bring reasonable expectations on uncovering who and what is thoroughly responsible for all these inseparable attacks, in contrast to what authorities have narrowed down to the public as masterminds, and also in hopes that it inspires not just other researchers, but those who want to take action and initiatives that need to be applied still for accountability and to remedy these problems and enforce prevention. I may not have all the answers to that, but at the least, I do have other perspectives balanced with official and unofficial evidence and missing links that are essential in understanding what else may have been in part responsible for these terrorist acts committed in the 90s and on to 9/11, along with possibly getting a better understanding of how we've gotten into this mess, which could have been prevented, and are worthy inquiries to these historical narratives that have had profound social and geopolitical impact, which should be deemed as cases that are still open investigations. But as a storyteller for now, I need your support. Consider becoming a Patreon. Help me continue investigating and producing more films and publishing works, especially with the hours of sifting through costly raw news archives. And perhaps we can spark more than just filmmaking, but a renaissance in the 9/11 truth movement, and finally get some progress and sensible closure. So please pass this along to everyone, and subscribe to my channels. And thank you for watching my film. Please view the complete source material of documentaries and literature that we've referenced in this film. For extensive research on Ramzi Yousef, read the book The New Jackals by Simon Reeve. And for more extensive research on the 1993 World Trade Center and Oklahoma City bombings, do read Michael Collins Piper's The Judas Goats.
Another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. The two men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives. One of the